Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. We'll give folks a minute to join in. If you would like to grab a quick tea, coffee, water, we have an excellent panel today to continue our united demand for US-Canada hands-off Venezuela. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's monthly picket action for US-Canada hands-off Venezuela. Today is the 36th consecutive monthly picket action that began, organized by Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, the Venezuela Peace Committee in Winnipeg, and Just Peace advocates from here in Canada, with the support of Venezuela solidarity organizations and other individuals across Canada. Today, we have a really excellent panel of speakers to help mark the 25th anniversary of the Bolivarian revolutionary process in Venezuela and 25 years of continuous US attacks, sanctions, blockades, and meddling in the internal affairs of the Venezuelan people. My name is ALISON BODINE, and I'm the coordinator of Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, and author of the book, Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Venezuela, from Battle of Ideas Press in 2018. And I am really honored to be here, marking 3 years of picket actions, which we'll do more next month, but also with a special international panel representing folks that are active in the streets, organizing and mobilizing both in Venezuela and around the world for just causes and in defense of the solidarity, of the self-determination and sovereignty of the people of Venezuela. We have Laura Isabel Franco joining us from the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity among the Peoples in Venezuela, Dr. Francisco Domínguez joining us from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign in the United Kingdom, and BANBOSE SHANGO joining us from the Alliance for Global Justice in the United States and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, GC. All folks that I have had the pleasure of struggling with together for Venezuela and many other important causes. And we have marched side by side, not only in Venezuela, but also through our work around the world. Today's Picket Action will run much like we have for the past 35 months. We'll have a panel of speakers. Then we actually will invite a few questions because we have Francisco Dominguez joining us at 12 p.m. midnight, all the way from England. So we said, hey, let's take advantage and have a few questions. And then we'll do our group photo at the end. So if you have a t-shirt or a sign or anything you'd like to wear, we'll chant together as if we are standing right in front of the U.S. Embassy in our city or right in front of the White House, demanding that Biden lift the blockade and sanctions against Venezuela and end the meddling in the internal affairs of the people of Venezuela. As I mentioned today and during the month of February, the people of Venezuela have been marking the 25th anniversary of the Bolivarian Revolution, which has made great advances for the lives of oppressed, poor, and working people in Venezuela. And throughout this time and before, as we will see in a short video in a second, the United States government and their imperialist allies, including the government of Canada, where I'm speaking from today, have carried out a campaign of overt and covert military operations, psychological warfare, coup attempts, blockades, and sanctions against Venezuela, non-stop, which has included recent attempts to overthrow the government of Venezuela and bring about a coup, as well as really continuous attacks on Venezuela's, especially oil and gas sector, which received some sanctions relief, but now that is even threatening to be rolled back by the United States. But as we mark the 25th anniversary of the Bolivarian Revolution, today's program will also talk about the gains and the challenges and why Venezuela is so important in our anti-imperialist struggle, why we look towards Venezuela when we talk about fighting back against U.S. hegemony, U.S. control that we see not only throughout Latin America, but also in the brutal Israeli genocide against the people of Palestine today. So let's unite our voices. And thank you again to all of our speakers and everyone joining here today. From here in Vancouver, the snow has started, which is a rare occasion. So we'll probably have some folks joining late because it's really hard to get home when the snow starts. And I also don't want to be amiss to say, folks, please put in the chat if you'd like a greeting and where you're joining from. It'd be great to hear from you. And if you're speaking from unceded or stolen territories like myself, recognize that I am on the Indigenous stolen territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I invite others to reflect on what that might mean for your work if you're joining from territories of Indigenous people in other places around the planet. So without further ado, I'd like to start with a short video prepared by Venezuela Analysis about the Caracazo, which is a very critical moment leading up to the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela's fight against neoliberalism, against imperialist repression. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in our panel, but I thought we'd start with the video. Thank you again, everyone. So that is the Caracazo and a bit of setting our tone today for the people of Venezuela's steadfast resistance and constant struggle. And we'll talk more about it for sure. I want to start our program today by introducing Laura Isabel Franco, who's a Venezuelan lawyer, a feminist, and a director of the Exchange and Cooperation at the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity among the Peoples in Venezuela. Thank you so much, Laura, for making time to join us and share some about the struggle in Venezuela on this very important occasion.
Saludos, queridas hermanas y hermanos, especialmente a mi hermana ALISON y a todo el maravilloso equipo de allá desde Canadá que sistemáticamente ha hecho un trabajo arduo.
An arduous job, a solidarity job with the Bolivarian Revolution and the Venezuelan people to visibilize the struggles and the realities lived in Venezuela, which very oftentimes are shown in media. And the Venezuelan blockade is also an information blockade, which also impacts because it doesn't show a people who is struggling and who is building from their own imaginary and their own realities socialism in the 21st century. First of all, I would like to say yes, today is February 27th, and it has been 35 years after the Caracazo, the first popular rebellion in Latin America against neoliberalism. It has been 35 years that we have been counting in history of Bolivarian revolution. Commander Chavez always taught us about this, and the Caracazo represents the beginning of a historical process because this people that rose and the people that died and were killed during those days, because these were several days when the people were on the street fighting against a neoliberal package, the anti-popular measures applied by the government of Picket gave way to the need of moving towards a process and a participatory democracy to leave behind everything that this false democracy history represented in Venezuela for 40 years. The Bolivarian Revolution, my dear comrades, is a historical process. It is a process that claims the foundations of set out by Simón Bolívar, and that had been part of an invisibilization process. Bolívar's legacy itself was unknown to ourselves, to us as Venezuelans, before the arrival, practically completely before the arrival of Chavez at the beginning of the century. To us, we are proud to say that the Bolivarian Revolution is the first successful revolution of this century, 21st century, and the first 25 years have been years of arduous struggles, but also conquers and victories of popular struggles that we are very proud of. And they show why the Venezuelan people continue to defend the revolutionary process, continue to ratify through the vote and participatory democracy, the road to Bolivarian and feminist socialism in this century. In addition, it has incorporated within its dynamic not only the legacy of Simón Bolívar, but it also has recovered at the dawn of the 21st century, and it is very important to acknowledge that with socialism in the 21st century, we have also been able to prove wrong the so-called end of ideologies and the end of history. We do not accept and have not accepted capitalism as the only path for the peoples and the countries in the world. So without a doubt, the Bolivarian Revolution has been uncomfortable for North American imperialism. It has been uncomfortable for the enemies of the peoples. It has been uncomfortable for the large economic powers, because we always say that this is why the imperialism and capitalism is always after us. This is a country in the south, in Latin America, in a continent that is very unequal, that is impoverished, that has been looted. And from here, we have been able to raise the flags of a better world, a viable world that is constructed by women and men in their diversity. Because Bolivarian Revolution, its main characteristic, it has to do with a very broad inclusion of all sectors that Hugo Chavez gave voice to. And so I would like to say that women, we were a very important part of the Venezuelan population that was able to gain a voice and to become visible from the first moment of the triumph of the Bolivarian Revolution. Because when we were called to a constitution process that was unique, it was singular in this history of Venezuela, we started to construct and to contribute to this constitution. And this became a legacy and a treaty of human rights. It's a beautiful constitution. It is a constitution that is enforced, it is not a dead charter. It vibrates in the Venezuelan people, in the democracy, in participatory and protagonic democracy. And women, there has been a before and after. It has been a really important watershed moment. Women, that the doors were open to women's participation, and this was very important. We do not take a step back in that sense. And we have found in Hugo Chavez an ally, the great ally of women. He was the first president who declared himself a feminist and who said that we could not build socialism without feminism, that we could not move towards full democracy without women. And this is why all the first women, all the policies, had to do with rights and the participation of women and care and tending to the situation of discrimination and invisibilization that we as women had and that women continue to have in the framework of a patriarchal and capitalist society that governs the world, but where Venezuela is different thanks to our women, to our big fighters, those who took the voice, who were congresswomen and ministers and have occupied important roles in the Bolivarian Revolution. We see that attacks and imperial aggression through the criminal blockade and through the application of sanctions that are unilateral coercive measures attacked directly the women at the beginning. When we remember today, 2015 and 2016, we need to identify how the aggression of imperialism was very much oriented to harm women, because women in Venezuela are the main drivers, the main engines of organization, and we are also very important for the movement. We are crucial to the movement, to the revolutionary. It is important to say that the Bolivarian Revolution then, so that we know, and this is in our reports in the United Nations and all the multilateral during the highest peak of our revolution, when we were able to recover oil sovereignty, when we emphasized governing for ourselves and governing for our own interests, which was what Chavez taught us. In Venezuela, we had practically complied with the target of zero hunger. You probably remember in 2011, the Bolivarian Revolution, with all its public policies, we had able to achieve this target of zero poverty. And this was the largest impact that we were able to have, and the largest impact of the sanctions fell on this, because we women were working on political participation. We were already in a different sphere than the one that the patriarchal and capitalist society relegates us to, which is this private sphere, the domestic sphere. We had been able to overcome the social political struggle. We had been able to access goods and services that are basic, such as access to health, to water, to education, and we had overcome many things. And the negative impact of sanctions and blockade, this crime against humanity committed by North American imperialism and its allies, impacted directly on the quality of life of Venezuelan people. And the mothers, many homes in Venezuela, over 60% of homes in Venezuela are led by women. These are chiefs of home, household chiefs, and their rights their rights retracted. They had to go back to organizing community resistance and collective resistance, because this is one of the biggest characteristics of the Bolivarian Revolution, that history of Bolivarian revolution cannot exist if it is not with a collective, a large collective struggle where we care about what happens in our communities, with our neighbors. The key of resistance of the Venezuelan people has been this, and this is why I always want to dignify the participation of women in this, because women are in the vast majority of these organization processes. This is a very important tool in the struggle against imperialism, the different communal forms of organization, the different forms of communal government that we have in Venezuela, which has been, without a doubt, very significant. We always say that imperialism with this war wants to take over our resources. This is a very rich country, but particularly in terms of oil. And we always say that the empire not only wants to take over our resources, but U.S. imperialism wants to destroy the Chavist revolutionary process. It wants to battle it, generating this idea that socialism is poverty, is misery, and the revolution has failed. That is the big narrative of the right-winged media in the world. Even some left-wing organizations are permeated by this narrative.
Which is precisely to build a new socialist state and communal state, and that socialist state can guarantee the production of goods that the Venezuelan people need. And the production in Venezuela has shown us that not everything is bad within the crisis. We also want to highlight in this forum that the crisis that has been set by the imperialism of the United States, by the permanent attacks to the Bolivarian Revolution since 1999 until today, is what they are really pursuing is to tackle that project. And the answer has been that the revolution has been strengthened in the national production, for example. Many times, the logics of our economy, an economy that is based on the oil rent, this created the fact that many of our goods would be imported. But this attack and this aggression made a call with the presidency of Maduro to regenerate the national production, and it has been key for the people. And when we ask ourselves, how can our people be able to resist this? It's because they've been able to buy the food and medicine and the medication in their own country. And within the framework of that terrible blockade, and especially during the pandemic that has not finished yet, I would like to say that that pandemic has not finished yet, because sometimes we think that because with the Biden administration, the blockade has been a little bit weakened, but that's not the case. The blockade is continuing, and we've created the resistance that even if it's small, is still significant in our path for our sovereignty. And just to close, to sum up a little bit, what I would like to say is that in Venezuela, from the group of the Commander Chavez with the presidency of Nicolas Maduro, there is a revolution. It's not a perfect revolution. It's not a revolution that like the ones we've studied or we've idealized. Well, especially the militants and so on. It's a revolution that has its contradictions with a lot of progress and a lot of setbacks, but it's a revolution that has maintained the idea of being an anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, and to be a revolution that is marking a path of socialism, that it's not a copy of any other process, but it's not either denying the history, our precedent history, the history of the big revolutions as a Cuban, the Cuban Revolution. All that is nurturing our revolution as well. But also we have specificities in our own revolution, and there's a socialist horizon that it's working to create this communal state, which is, of course, a state of the working class and of the workers. It's a democratic state that guarantees human rights, and that even when it's still receiving all this aggression in a year like this, which is a challenging year, where we're going to have president elections, we still stay to our principles, and we're still in the streets defending the revolution, because especially women, we know that there won't be any other process that will open the doors for us and in which we will have future perspectives of reaching even further rights for us. There won't be any other process that is not within the revolutionary, the Bolivarian revolution. I'm here for the questions that may come up, and thank you again, Alison, and from the whole team of Venezuela and for all the social organizations. I take the voice to tell you that we're always grateful in our hearts, because we know how difficult it is to raise the voice of solidarity in a process like ours, with so many attacks and so many lies that we're receiving all the time, and to maintain yourselves so strong, defending our principles. That means that you are really courageous people, and we admire you from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, for giving us that perspective. It's I know I gave you a difficult job to express what it's like to be a woman organizing in Venezuela under the pressure of the United States within the Bolivarian revolutionary process in a short period. So I appreciate the ideas and the seeds that you gave us and the perspective of ongoing struggle and commitment. 25 years of working against the world's biggest imperialist power is no easy task at all. And we have the responsibility really to do more to alleviate the pressure on Venezuela, to get an end to these sanctions and blockades, to release the gold from the UK. You know, there are concrete campaigns that we are all working on, and we need to work harder to build in this coming period. So Thank you, Laura, for your words today and joining us. Next, I want to invite up BANBOSE SHANGO, who is someone that I've also met on many continents. He has a long history of struggle in the nationalist, peace, student, socialist, solidarity, and Pan-Africanist movement. He was born in Jamaica, grew up in Chicago, and has a background in electrical and plumbing. He has spoken for and represented the AARP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and the AARP-GC on numerous campuses, conferences, delegations, seminars, community meetings, and at international events, and is also with the Alliance for Global Justice, who has been an important part of campaigning for the victorious freedom of Alex Saab and also against US attacks on Venezuela as part of building a broader and more united movement across North America. So BANBOSE, it's a pleasure to have you here. I will say shortly that I did ask BANBOSE very last minute because William Kamakaro had a last minute engagement come up. So we'll hear from William soon, but thank you so much for BANBOSE for stepping in, and I'm really looking forward to your perspective on this important occasion as well.
Thank you very much, Alison. And thank you, Laura. That was fantastic. I want to say that, unfortunately, William, who was to be here tonight, has caught COVID. And so he is trying to get over that at this point. And so he could not make it. However, he does send us greetings and wish you success.
That's quite an engagement.
Yes. Also, I think that in looking at the 25 years of the Venezuelan Revolution, it is just chock full of victories everywhere. And the victories are exemplary because Venezuela has withstood almost every attack that the United States imperialism has attempted to eliminate the revolution with. Venezuela showed us in this hemisphere that reactionary coup d'etats can be overthrown, and that it does not take that long. Usually, it was done in Venezuela in less than 48 hours. Venezuela has also shown us how to do solidarity. They've shown us how uniting with other progressive and revolutionary movements in what Venezuela calls our America, we can see that many advances can be made. And just to mention a few, one that is often not known or not looked upon is when Venezuela and Cuba started the Operation Miracle to repair the eyes of people who had advanced cataracts, some of them just barely able to see. One of the first beneficiaries of that process was a Chicago bus driver who was on the verge of getting fired because he was losing his eyesight and could not afford an operation to repair his eyesight. It was Venezuela that brought him to Caracas, performed the operation, sent him back to Chicago so that he could maintain that job. they have done that with a number of other processes. I am extremely fascinated and proud of the Great Housing Mission, which is created over a very short period of less than 15 years, thousands of houses, apartments, and apartment buildings for the people of Venezuela, who many of them lived in the hillsides, the barrios of Caracas. And when they had major rains and flooded, many people died because their buildings slid off the mountain. These people now have real houses. That's something that we cannot say for people in the United States who have been called unhoused or the homeless, because throughout the United States, there are many people who are homeless, has no future in the sense of getting an apartment, a shelter anywhere. And not only that, but just the fact that they are homeless, the government is now making it a crime. So if you're sleeping in the streets, you're committing a crime, even though you have nowhere else to sleep. Again, we're just very amazed and very proud of all the contributions that Venezuela has made. We are proud of the fact that Venezuela helped to create ALBA, which produced Telesur, the first real news media for South and Central America and the Caribbean. We are proud that Venezuela attempted to build the Bank of the South, which would have replaced the World Bank and the IMF. We are proud that Venezuela, through ALBA, has helped not just the people of Venezuela, but the people of Bolivia, the people of Brazil, the people of Ecuador, the people of Cuba. So the value of protecting and ensuring the continuation of the Venezuelan revolution cannot be understated. We thank Venezuela also for declaring South and Central America and the Caribbean a zone of peace, which has really put a pin in the United States war balloon, because they intended to make South and Central America and the Caribbean a zone of war. And luckily today, we have added to the great work that is being done in Venezuela, the work that is being done throughout the region. Colombia has taken its rightful place. Brazil is back. The struggle over Peru is very tentative and may not last too much longer. So there is movement, there's progress, and there's the Venezuelan revolution who is helping to guide and support it in every way it can. I would be remiss if I didn't also say that we have throughout the world a phenomenon called neocolonialism. And neocolonialism is at its heights in Africa. And we can see that by what happened in Cape Verde with our diplomat, Alex Saab, because Cape Verde had no legitimate reason or rights to arrest Alex Saab and to hold him for the length of time that they did. And you will notice that he was turned over to the United States to be trafficked to Miami a day before the Cape Verde election because the new president was going to release him. So Venezuela also is instrumental in this struggle against neocolonialism, and we thank them for that. There's a lot of other things that could be said, but I'm sure that there are speakers who can do it much better, much more eloquent than I could. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, BANBOSE. We'll see about that. No, it's thank you for joining the panel. That was an excellent, again, also a tall order to express what Venezuela has meant for the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggle. So thank you for summarizing that for us. For our final speaker for today, I want to welcome Dr. Francisco Dominguez, who is the head of the research group on Latin America at Middlesex University, which is not in North America, it's in England, and National Secretary of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign in the United Kingdom, which is an important sister campaign to our struggle here in North America. So of course, I will say, Francisco, thank you for staying up. He says it's no problem at all, but it is past midnight in England. And so we really appreciate hearing from you. It can be harder to collaborate our campaigns with that time difference, but looking forward to any updates you have to share with us. And of course, your important perspective from also decades of organizing work and in solidarity with Venezuela. So Francisco, thank you for joining. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on the 36th month of organizing this. This is very impressive. After Laura or Laura and after BANBOSE, they're difficult acts to follow, but I'll do my best. When Hugo Chavez was elected in 1998, and almost immediately he went for a new constitution, which I remember very well, which followed. And I was shocked when I realized that this was a very thorough anti-neoliberal constitution. This was extremely audacious at the time, because in 1998, 1999, Latin America was a sea of neoliberalism. All the countries in the region were totally committed to neoliberalism. In fact, in 1991, President George H. Bush, the father, the one who was educated, not the other one, actually made an appeal to Latin America to create the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, FAAA, which was also known as ALCA in Spanish. And the whole idea was to ensure that all the Latin American nations reduced their barriers, and they became really the backyard from the economic point of view of US products. You can imagine they would have inundated the region with their products. They would have taken advantage of everything without paying any taxes and so forth. And at the time when George Bush made the appeal, the Latin American governments were queuing up in Washington to actually join it. So in 1998, suddenly, out of nowhere, as it were, because people didn't know too much about Venezuela, there was this military guy, Hugo Chavez, who suddenly promulgated this new constitution. The only country that was not neoliberal at the time was Cuba, that was in real trouble because of the collapse of the USSR in 1991, precisely in the same year. And the situation that Cuba faced at the time was really, really bad. Just to give you an idea how isolated Venezuela was in its anti-neoliberal push. Cuba in 1993 faced what Cubans call Armageddon. That was the name they gave to the collapse of the USSR and its effects. And a Cuban friend of mine summarized their situation as follows. He said, imagine, Francisco, you're up a ladder, painting a wall with a brush, and suddenly somebody takes the ladder away, and we're hanging from the brush. He said that was the actual situation that Cuba faced at the time. I won't give the figures and details because the situation was much, much worse. So that's the first thing. When you read that oil and other natural wealth cannot be privatized, and then the Constitution guarantees, as a matter of constitutional principle, free health, free education, and jobs, and everything else for the population, that was extraordinary. And ever since, the revolution has been doing every possible effort to ensure that that is fulfilled to the maximum capacity that the revolution has economically, including during the period of sanctions. That's the first point we want to make. The second one is the nature of the revolution. Laura was saying a minute ago, we have a revolution which is very unique, is very peculiar, it's got imperfections. There is no revolution which is not unique. All of them have been unique. Absolutely all of them. All of them have imperfections. All of them have problems. If they didn't have problems, there wouldn't be revolution. The important thing is the line of direction where they're going. One of the important landmarks, I would say, that the Bolivarian revolutions has left us is the following. Up to 1998 in Venezuela, Latin America was dominated by what I would call the Cuban paradigm. That is to say, in order for you to be able to overcome the oligarchical rule supported by imperialism, you needed an armed revolution. You overthrow the state and you proceed to the socialist transformation very quickly, as the Cubans did in 1959. There was another possible pathway, which was Allende, that took place in Chile between 1970 and 1973. And that was what was called at the time the peaceful road to socialism, which ended up in a coup d'etat. So the Cuban paradigm became predominant until the Bolivarian Revolution. That is to say, the Bolivarian Revolution was able to do a peaceful transformation, but a peaceful transformation that led to the structural reform and revolutionary transformation of the state. If you were to compare the nature of the state in 1999 in Venezuela compared to the nature of the state today, there is no question about it. That although it's been peaceful and has been slow, as it were, because it's taken this long, it is undoubtedly the case that the transformation of the structure, of the political structure, has transformed the class nature of the Bolivarian state, or the Venezuelan state. In 1999, the armed forces were on the side of the bourgeoisie and on the side of imperialism, not all of them, but the top echelons of it, as we could see by the 2002 coup d'etat that took place in April in that year. If you were to look at the revolution at the state, the Venezuelan state today, you have that the armed forces are completely on the side of the people. There is the civic military alliance, which is the cornerstone of the revolution, which is something that is absolutely essential for the defense of the revolution, which has been obtained as a result of conscious political objective. This was something that Chavez wanted to do. This was the leadership that he gave to the revolution, and he was able to politicize, win over, the armed forces. If you go to any barracks in Venezuela, when I did go there and saw this, I was so pleasantly happy when I saw that at the entrance of the barrage you have Patria, Socialismo, o Muerte, Venceremos, which is, amazing, impossible. I thought I was dreaming at the time. But in order to give tangible concreteness to this general point, you have to look at not only at the fact that the armed forces are on our side completely. Every attempt to organize a coup d'etat failed because of that. Every attempt by the United States to enlist, the armed forces, they're able to enlist individuals, but never significant forces. So therefore, every attempt that they try fails. But more important than that is the fact that the population actually now participates actively, not only as civilians, but also as members of the military defense of the revolution were these to be in danger. And this is the militias. The people's militias is a constitutional principle of the revolution, which actually makes the population at large participant in the defense of the revolution. And the figures that I have is that there are 4 million militia people, plus 500,000 members of the former military. I think that's one of the reasons, must be one of the reasons why the United States, although it threatened Venezuela with military invasion so many times, they thought about it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and so far they haven't done it. So that's the second very important thing. In other words, as Chavez put it so masterfully, he said, our revolution is peaceful, but it's not disarmed. The Chilean revolution was peaceful and was disarmed. So when they moved, they crushed us completely, without any major problems. The point that follows from that is that the revolution would not have been able to resist the worst period of the sanctions, the unilateral coercive measures, which, as far as I'm aware, it is 930 of them. 930 sanctions against Venezuela is huge. Venezuela cannot trade oil, according to those sanctions, cannot trade in gold, cannot trade in minerals, cannot engage in finances, cannot engage in financial transactions, cannot engage in participating in the market to restructure the debt and so on and so forth. We cannot get credits. That is to say, the idea was to asphyxiate it completely. And during the period of sanction, according to the report of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which was published in 2019, they indicate there that in the years between 2017 and 2019, as a result of the sanctions, 40,000 people unnecessarily died. In my estimation, I think if you take 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, when the sanctions began to be overcome to some degree by the government, I think easily they could have, the sanctions must have killed easily 150,000 people, if no more. The Pinochet dictatorship in Chile took 17 years to assassinate 5,000 people. In Venezuela, it was the equivalent of throwing bombs on the population by these sanctions. 100,000 is just incredibly hard, really, really hard. And the reason, and this is my point, the reason why there's been successful resistance is because the gigantic, extraordinary level of grassroots organizations that exist in Venezuela. This is the bloodline. This is what keeps it going. Without this, it wouldn't be possible. The quality of the leadership is an essential condition, and the quality of the leadership of the Bolivarian Revolution under Chavez and under President Maduro has been magnificent. But without that component at the bottom of society, where there are thousands and thousands, my last calculation, my last research, which was done a couple of years ago, tell me that the number of committees that exist, of communal councils and different committees at the grassroots levels that exist in Venezuela is in the region of 46,000. That is to say, there is a huge level of organization at every level, And what is extraordinary, and I confirm, or this confirms Laura's point, 85% of those committees are run by women. And let me tell you, I've seen these women in Venezuela. I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of them because they know what they're doing. They really get things done. They run the show very decisively and without too much noise. It's really incredible. So it's that massive participation of the masses which makes it a revolution. It's not just a revolution because of the revolutionary ideas. It's a revolution also because of the level of participation of the masses. And I'm going to send Alison a link to my pamphlet. I send it to you only with permission for you to send it to everybody if you can.
Sure.
My pamphlet is called Maduro: A Decade Continuing Chavez's Socialist Anti-Imperialist Struggle. And the reason for this is this. When that pamphlet came out in our organization, the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, obviously we wanted to celebrate, to commemorate rather, the 10th anniversary of the death of Hugo Chavez, which we did anyway. And I remember saying to my comrades, I said, what about President Maduro? He, took over and he suffered the worst part of it, really the worst part of it. And he was able to overcome and succeed without being Chavez, which is an extraordinary achievement in my view. And I told the friends, I said, we need to celebrate this. We need to ensure that this is registered. And this is what this pamphlet is about. So there is more, but most have been said in terms of the achievements and so on. But one of the important significance of the Bolivarian Revolution in Latin American terms is the pioneering work and push by Hugo Chavez for regional integration. It was the Bolivarian Revolution that pushed for regional integration. BANBOSE, mentioned the Bank of the South, mentioned the Operation Miracle, and there is plenty more of things that actually are already well left as a legacy, which now that we are coming back in the second pink tide in Latin America, we are taking from there again. So the possibilities are enormous in that sense. And I want to make two final points, Alison, if I may. Do I have the time? Yeah. The first one is that all of this is taking place in a very important context of the severe decline of the United States. This is a very auspicious thing. It doesn't make the United States a peaceful place. Quite the opposite. It makes it more aggressive. Nevertheless, just want to give you a few of the figures. The United States GDP is 27 trillion. But it owes, the public debt of the United States is 34 trillion. That is to say, the difference between the GDP and the debt is 7 trillion. Put it differently, if the United States were to use all is able to produce in monetary terms in 1 year, which is huge, and pay all the debt that it owes with those 27 trillion, it will still owe 7 trillion more. 7 trillion is a gigantic figure. The combined GDP of all the Latin American countries, including Brazil, together are 6 trillion. That is to say, the United States is in severe problems. It's got trade deficits which are incredibly large. It's got 800 military bases and several wars that it's got to finance, and it doesn't have the resources. The way the United States resolved this problem of expenditure is totally fake, and it's a sort of time bomb, financially speaking. The United States, what it does every year, if you pay attention to what is going on in the United States, every year there is a discussion in Congress where the president, whoever it is, Democrat or Republican, to increase the ceiling of the debt in order for the United States to borrow more money. But the way the United States borrows money is not like any other country. Any other country, in order to borrow money, will have to go to a bank or to the IMF or to the World Bank and get a package and so on. The United States issues treasury bonds, and that is the way it solves things. So, and they're very lucrative. If you buy them, and I'm not advocating people to buy them, I'm just saying they're very lucrative. That's why they're sold very quickly. So the United States every year increases its debt massively every single time. So it's very fake. And as a consequence of this expenditure, the United States spends more money than it's able to produce. Since the 2001 war against Afghanistan, the United States engaged in wars in about 6-7 countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, and so on, the whole of the Middle East, with the intention to attack Iran. And so far it's failed. But because of his inability economically and politically, the United States has lost all these wars, although it's caused huge amount of devastation in this place, but it lost the wars. And as a consequence, this had the cost to the United States of $9 trillion. That is to say, as a consequence of these wars, the United States lost $9 trillion, which is more than the combined GDP of the whole Latin American countries. In other words, the situation is so auspicious that the United States doesn't have the same capacity as it used to have in the 20th century to intervene in the internal affairs of Latin American countries successfully, although it does continue to intervene anyway, sometimes with terrible consequences. The final point I want to make is this. Venezuela is a beacon is an example in every possible respect. I mean, Venezuela not only plays a leading role politically in Latin America, but it plays a leading role internationally. It links up with China, it links up with Asia, it links up with other countries, and it's bringing Latin America to Africa, Africa to Latin America, and so on and so forth. In fact, if you think about it, the first visit that Chavez undertook to China was exactly in 1999. That is to say, his perception was totally clear from the very beginning that unless you seek international allies that will help you, then you will not be able to survive on your own. So regional integration is a central cornerstone of his political strategy to defend not only the revolution, but extend it collectively in the whole region and then link up with friendly countries around the globe in order to do this. So therefore, the survival of the revolution is extremely important in the struggle against neoliberalism and against capitalism, not only in Latin America, not only in Venezuela, but in the world as a whole. Just to give you an example, in Africa, there's been a rebellion against French colonialism in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. And these 3 countries decided to expel the French military. They decided to stop the uranium export, and they decided to stop completely the gold export to France, which put France in an impossible situation. When they were faced with the possibility of a military attack, they decided to create a collective unity, and they may issue a communique saying, if one of us is attacked, all 3 will be attacked, so we'll all come to defend. And the military threat actually dissipated, which is an indication that the global south really is rising up. I'm not following completely the example of Venezuela, but the first thing that Venezuela has done, it linked up immediately with Burkina Faso, which is one of the most radical of these 3, and it signed 20 cooperation agreements right away. And the leader of Burkina Faso is a guy called Ibrahim Traoré, who is a very tall, wonderful, very imposing young military officer with a red beret, which looks to me like an African Chavez, which is fantastic, symbolically, emblematically, and so on. So the defense of the revolution in Venezuela is crucial, not only for Venezuela, it's crucial for everybody else. So solidarity more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco Dominguez, Dr. Francisco Dominguez from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. Also very comprehensive and give us a lot to think about, especially in the global context of attacks on Venezuela and what Venezuela represents in their, again, anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggle. But very important also to talk about the changing world global context. And so thank you for bringing about those ideas and analysis. Again, the links are in the chat for the pamphlet that Francisco referred to, but also for a recent article that presented some of these ideas more briefly about 25 years of the Bolivarian Revolution. There is one question in the chat or in the Q&A box. Everyone's very disciplined on this call and is using the Q&A box. Much appreciation. That refers to resources, needing resources about what's happening in Venezuela today. So there is some information in the chat. The links that were shared from Dr. Francisco Dominguez, but also Laura shared with us a link to the Venezuelan Anti-Blockade Observatory, which has resources in English and Spanish, and I believe other languages, about Venezuela's fight against blockade and sanctions and the impact of blockade and sanctions, which you'll also hear referred to as unilateral coercive measures. That's like a United Nations term to refer to these sanctions, which have caused real death and destruction and hardship, as they're intended to do on the ground in Venezuela. It is another, sanctions are an act of war against people meant to coerce them, where the name comes from, into changing their government, into pressuring their government, in this case, into overthrowing the government and really following the direct demands nearly of the US, who says, Venezuelans, you have to vote for this president or we're gonna make life more difficult for you. And they've said that again and again. And Venezuelans have said, no, we won't listen to you. We know life will be more difficult, but our principles are more important. So, among other things. So, sorry for that long diatribe there, but I really appreciate the whole panel. And like I said, we'll take some questions and answers. You know, maybe we'll do about 15 minutes before we move into our group photo, because I do think there's some important ones there. One of which is about the oil industry in Venezuela. So there was some, Francisco touched on it a bit, it has to do with the importance of oil in Venezuela, oil and gas. What does its ownership look like today? It's very interwoven with US attacks. So we didn't even touch on today as we have previously, and we could in future pickets, you know, Citgo and the theft of Citgo and how that happened. But the question, simply put, what is the state of the oil industry in Venezuela? Is it controlled by the government or by Guaido's false government, or has it been sold off? So, Dr. Francisco Dominguez, do you think you could take a first stab at that one?
When you have your economy totally blockaded, you know, in this case of Venezuela, it's very intense. The one thing you can do without vulnerating the principles of the revolution is to make deals with international capital. And there is no problem about that at all. Cuba actually engaged in joint partnership with companies from Spain in order to expand its tourism industry. The proportion that is part of the joint ventures of the oil industry in Venezuela is very small. I don't have the actual figure because they are discrete. Nevertheless, what matters is the ability of the United States to sabotage the oil industry in Venezuela very successfully. Venezuela used to produce 3.5 million barrels of oil a day. And as a consequence of the sanctions, particularly during the Obama period, but not exclusively, later on it became worse with Trump, the oil industry was able to produce about 200,000 barrels of oil a day, which was a disaster. And Venezuela being so heavily dependent on the export of oil, you can imagine the information was that in about 2013, 2014, Venezuela was receiving something like $5 billion per year in terms of rent, you know, what you call renta petrolera, oil revenues to the industry. By 2017-18, it was receiving 1% of that total. So you cannot run the economy at the time without actually having oil revenue. At the moment, as a consequence of Venezuela being able to circumvent various sanctions by the United States and finding partners all over the place, I don't know how Venezuela does it. And if I knew how they did it, I wouldn't tell you anyway. Because, you know, they have to protect their sources, their contacts, and so on. Right now, and this was the information 2 days ago, the Venezuelan oil industry is producing 980,000 barrels of oil a day, which is a massive recovery, but it's still plenty of room for improvement. And I think with the new partners, particularly in Asia, say China, which is the main consumer, it's not the only one, but it's one of the main consumers, then I think this is going to recover. The reason why it went down so badly was not only because of the sanctions and the finances associated with those sanctions, but also because in order for you to be able to produce oil and gasoline particularly, you know, oil to be consumed as fuel, Venezuela has a very heavy oil that is extracted. It's like bitumen, or bitumen I think is in English, very similar to tar. But in order for you to make it soluble, you need diluent, and Venezuela doesn't produce diluents. And there was an Indian company that was supplying this diluent to Venezuela, and the United States stopped it by sabotaging that company. So as a result, you know, it wasn't able to produce, not even for its own consumption. Now this has been resolved. So Venezuela is way on the way to go further. Now, one important footnote regarding this, by 2014, Venezuela's budget depended on the oil revenue by about 70%. That is to say, about 70% of that went into the budget. So if the oil industry went, the budget went, which is what happened as a consequence of the sanctions. Right now, 2024, 2023, the final fiscal year 2023, the proportion of the oil revenue that went to the budget was around 30%. So there is a massive reduction in dependency on oil. And having said this, the proportion of the budget in the case of Venezuela devoted to social expenditure in the last budget was 77.1%, which is massive. And it was 72% before, and so on. I think it was 77 this year, 74 the year before, 71 the year before. So it's really gigantic, and everything is directed to the people. I think at one point in the next few years, I don't know exactly how long it's going to take, because it takes time for these things to recover. In the next 3 years, I think Venezuela is going to recover quite substantially. What has helped is, I'm sorry to make it so long, but I think people want to know these details. The Duque government in Colombia colluded with the United States and the right wing in Venezuela, the Venezuelan right wing, in order to confiscate Monomeros, which is a petrochemical company which is in Barranquilla, in Colombia, which belongs to Venezuela, to PDVSA. And it produces fertilizers, which are essential for farmers in Colombia. As a consequence of Petro being elected, Petro returned Monomeros to Venezuela, and one of the first actions of the Maduro government was to actually donate thousands of tons of fertilizers to farmers in Colombia who were desperate to get it. And now the company is back to Venezuela, which will help in terms of the technical side, will help the recovery of the oil industry because it's part of it. So it looks good, but there is plenty to be done yet.
Thank you. No, it's you know, looking at who's joined tonight's webinar and joins every month, most of us, many of us are activists, you know, organizers, and what we're doing with these monthly pickets partly is mining information to use in our ongoing struggle. So thorough answers are much appreciated. No problem there. Laura, there is a question from our co-fighter Mary Carmen Guevara in Ottawa, who we'll hear shortly in a minute, but she would like to know, shortly or a summary about the contribution of social movements to the Bolivarian Revolution and the importance of social movements within the Bolivarian Revolution.
Saludos, Mari Carmen. Bueno, fíjense, para
Hi, Mari Carmen. Just to bring it into the current context, today the president, Nicolás Maduro, was at a massive popular assembly with all the speakers of the social movements, because in the last few weeks we've been in an agitation process of debate, because the president summoned us as people and as Chavez tradition to discuss the new plan of the nation towards the president elections coming up in 2024 to 2030. Sorry, that is the coming mandate. The president has has written 7 lines or 7 guidelines to deepen in certain areas that the president considers essential, like the economic transformation. And I really thank our brother Francisco for that magnificent summary of the situation. That is part of the economy heart of Venezuela. And for this reason, because we've suffered in our bodies the dependency on the rent of oil, this debate of economy and the diversification of economy is always within our revolution. And now the president is placing it as the first line of the transformation, which is economic transformation. The second line is absolute independence, which is to continue moving forward in all these processes that are so important for the Venezuelan sovereignty, and that it's also related to our relationship with other peoples of the world. And this dependency, the struggle for the independency is still going on. And the third line of transformation is the peace consolidation and the security. Venezuela has recognized President Maduro as the president of peace. We haven't only been through economic sanctions, but also the war, the non-conventional war that we've been through has attacked the peace and security of Venezuela. We've had many times scenarios so that Venezuelans create a civil war, and all that has been systematized, avoided by the military the armed force in our country and by the leadership of Nicolás Maduro, that has always had a response so that the people does not start a civil war, because that would be the great excuse for the United States, for example. And the fourth line is the social security. The sanctions have undiminished the households of people in Venezuela, and the distribution of the rent of oil, and all the negative impacts that we've had. The recovery of the social protection is one of the main guidelines that involves many topics. For example, how can we have free access to public services that are key, for example, health services, and the dignification of the salaries, because the salaries have been also beaten in this war process. And the fifth transformation is the process of repoliticization. This is very interesting because bring us again to the debate. That's why I wanted to close with this message, because this debate is precisely with the popular organizations and movements and the communal committees and all these instances of participation, popular participation in Venezuela. And it's and this has created a huge incidence against the war against Venezuela, because the people that was always together to debate had to go during many years to go back to this for the struggle for the rights, for the more basic rights, and they had to start all over again. And the process of repoliticization is key for the youth that has lived the worst moments of the war, and they've been victims of this process of the economic migration that has co-opted, especially the interest of the youth, the professional youth in Venezuela, the idea that we can solve our own problems, which is what Maduro is calling. And the sixth line is ecology, that of course is key for Venezuela, because our natural resources is it's a responsibility and also a potence, and it's a responsibility for the planet to be able to use them, and not only to explode them with a traditional capitalist logic. And then finally we have the geopolitical line that has cross-cut all debates and all assemblies, because this new multipolar world in which Venezuela is submerged, Commander Chavez created a vision, and to know that we cannot have only one power in the world, that we need to go towards a more balanced world. And for the people of Venezuela and the leadership of Venezuela, we have the diplomacy of the peoples and of the Bolivarian revolution. We don't only understand diplomacy between states, but also between peoples. And there, the social movement is with this call from Maduro. We are feeling once again that we can be the transformers and the protagonists of this process of transformation. And we know that our ideas, our proposals will be received by the president, and that will be key for the campaign of Maduro, that the people's voice will be heard in this campaign. And whatever the president says, he's going to commit to this. Once again, we give you a hug in solidarity with all the people that are here and everybody who can see this streaming at some other time, because Venezuela is still fighting. It does not give up, and it will have new challenges this year, and we expect that these solidarity spaces are still going on, because when we are in this kind of context of elections, we know that the bad interests are raised and darker plans also are raised, and the right plans are raised as well. And from here, we are ready to share all the context in Venezuela. And so so that you know that this year we are building another victory for the Bolivarian revolution. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Laura. Thank you. So we're going to do a few, like 3 more questions and try and get it wrapped up in our panel, but there are still some important ones, and also questions that we will address again in further picket actions. You've actually given me and the organizers of this picket very good ideas for future speakers, which I really appreciate. But I do want to just say there was a question about Canada's involvement. So briefly, I will say that Canada is alongside the US in this campaign to overthrow the democratically elected government of Venezuela, specifically representing the interests of the government of Canada as far as maintaining US hegemony and the benefits that come from that for the government of Canada, but also Canadian mining interests. And oil and gas is, of course, also very important to the economy of Canada. And so pressure in Venezuela and, Canada's involvement in Venezuela's oil and gas sector is very important. I can't summarize, everything, but I will say that, Canada's one of 2 countries, maybe a handful more, that continue to recognize the President of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, as the president. Juan Guaido has no recognition in Venezuela, not even from most of Venezuela's opposition. So there is really, it's a disgrace for diplomatic relations, for human rights. It's of course a disgrace that Canada supports US sanctions and has added some additional sanctions, but mostly Canada is really continuing their meddling in the internal affairs and pretending like they can tell the people of Venezuela how to vote in this upcoming election. So future pickets will talk a lot more definitely about the election and how to organize to fight against a massive disinformation and misinformation campaign that runs through, from CNN to the CBC here in Canada about what's happening in Venezuela today. And I'll post a link to an article. It was an interview with myself and Maria Paez Victor, a Venezuelan Canadian sociologist and a solidarity organizer who lives in Toronto, in a publication called The Maple that gives some important perspective about Canada-Venezuela relations. So I encourage people to read that. And now I'll ask Dr. Francisco Dominguez to address the question regarding the Essequibo in Venezuela today and any updates you have about that struggle to defend Venezuela's sovereignty.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. I'm a doctor because I work in the academia, but I'm a political activist, Francisco would do. Being an academic pays the bills. The one thing that matters to me, the one thing that matters to me is doing the work. Just a couple of things before answering the question on Essequibo, which requires some detail, not much. The tasks that we have ahead of us is what we're calling for, is the immediate and unconditional lifting of all the sanctions against Venezuela. That's our demand. And that's the demand of the people of Venezuela, and that's the demand of the government of Venezuela, that's the demand of many in the global south. The total, absolute, and immediate, unconditional lifting of all the sanctions. And number 2, we demand that nobody intervenes or has the right to intervene in internal affairs of Venezuela, as the United States does all the time. And 3, we totally oppose and reject any attempt by any external or internal party in Venezuela to try to change the government by violent means or unconstitutional ones. So these are the key platform. Once we have that, the rest is sort of easy, if you see what I mean. And in terms of the sanctions, here in the UK, we have a running campaign for several years for the United Kingdom to return the 31 tons of gold that are held in the Bank of England, which belong to Venezuela. And there are, in European financial institutions as a whole, retained illegally something like $8 billion that belong to Venezuela, which is $8,000 million. Just to give you an idea of what this means, the GDP of Nicaragua is 14 billion. So Venezuela has retained 8 billion, which is nearly half or more than half of the size of the GDP of Nicaragua, which is a huge amount. And Venezuela has very clear proposals regarding the participation of the United Nations Development Program to actually channel these funds in the way the government says they're going to do, which is health, education, infrastructure, and so on. So that's number one. In terms of Guaidó is not the interim president anymore because this position was abolished by the very opposition itself. The so-called National Assembly that they control took a decision last year that to eliminate the interim president. So he's not president of anything at all. And when he was interim president, he didn't have control even over a lamppost in Caracas, let alone anything else. So it was a joke. It was a really nasty piece of work because it was a ploy by the United States to use him in order to get the assets of Venezuela and attack him. And all these countries now, the European Union abandoned Guaidó some years ago, a couple of years ago. They stopped recognizing him. Even the United States has an ambassador in Venezuela, and the United Kingdom does have an ambassador in Venezuela, literally all the countries. So in that sense, Venezuela has won quite dramatically. And in terms of Guaidó's party, Voluntad Popular, the popular will, out of trickery some years ago, was allowed to be part of the Socialist International. The Europeans played that trick. I couldn't believe that fascist parties such as Voluntad Popular would be a member of the Socialist International. It was a member of the Socialist International until 2 days ago. It was expelled. So it doesn't belong to the Socialist International anymore. So something is going on in Europe for some reason. Maybe they want some Venezuelan oil. I do not know. But whatever it is, even if they did it for the wrong reasons, they have done the right thing on that one, which is very good. Now come to the Essequibo. Venezuela has the authority and ownership over the Essequibo region, which is under dispute. This is 159,000 square kilometers of territory, which is the one that is recognized by some decision in 1899 as being part of, British Guyana. The actual British Guyana itself is very small. It has 215,000 square kilometers. It's very small indeed. It's almost insignificant. And what is going on is that they made a deal with Exxon to actually start extracting oil from a territory which is under dispute. And Venezuela was able in 1966, after various campaigns and diplomatic offensive on the part of the Venezuelan government at the time, well before Chavez. And they managed to persuade the United Kingdom, because it was obvious that the decision that had been taken by an arbitration in Paris in 1899 was the wrong one, that actually gave the territory to Venezuela, to Guyana. And 1966, which is the Geneva Agreement of 1966, which is available everywhere. Actually, it's available in Spanish, in French, and in English. If anybody wants to have it, we can send it to people. And in there, it says very clearly that this is the territory under dispute. And if you look at the constitutions of Venezuela, which is a crucial evidence, evidentiary dimension, in all the constitutions, Venezuela has had 26 constitutions. It's a very dynamic country. You see what I mean? In all 26 constitutions, the Essequibo territory is recognized in those constitutions as territory of Venezuela. So there is plenty of evidence, historically, constitutionally, legally, and so on, to demonstrate conclusively that these territory belong to Venezuela. The 1966 Geneva Agreement compels the two parties, as a result of their agreement, to actually come to the negotiation table and resolve the matter peacefully. What is interesting regarding the Geneva Agreement of 1966 is that when the agreement was signed, which was in February 1966, Guyana did not exist as an independent country, it was still a colony. And it was as a result of the diplomatic efforts of Venezuela that actually, when it was at that time, the new Guyanese government constituted as an independent country, that Venezuela insisted that they signed the agreement, and they did. So this is a three-party agreement between Venezuela, the United Kingdom, and Guyana, that they agree that this territory, this 159,000 square kilometers of territory under dispute, and they're going to find international ways, peaceful ways to resolve it. That's what it is. So the Exxon thing is that Exxon is extracting oil illegally, not only from territory which is under dispute, actually is extracting oil from territory that is actually earmarked now as we speak as part of the Venezuelan territory. Is not even in the territorial dispute, which is a complete aggression. So Venezuela actually wants to ensure that, you know, this is returned to them. The information at the moment is not very clear, but apparently Exxon is getting between 200,000 to 500,000 barrels of oil a day out of this operation. Guyana itself gets something like 2 to 5% out of the profits of this. Exxon takes the whole lot, which is outrageous. All of this was going on, and then Guyana began, well, the United States began to encourage Guyana to militarize the conflict by inviting the Southern Command of the Pentagon to come in and engage in military exercises and so on, because they wanted to deal with what they call the Venezuelan threat, which is not true, it's false. So as a result of that, Venezuela was very worried. So as a result of the effort, particularly of Lula from Brazil, there was a meeting on the 20th of December, which took place after the referendum on the 3rd of December on Guyana, which was taken by the Venezuelans, which was very successful. On the 20th of December, there was a meeting in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at which not only CELAC, not only CARICOM, but also the United Nations participated. Even Antonio Guterres himself was present at the meeting. And as a consequence of the meeting, there was an 11-point memorandum that was agreed by the two parties. I just want to mention point number one. I won't go through the 11 one because it's too long. Number one says very precisely that the two parties agree, and this was signed by Irfan Ali, the president of Guyana, and President Maduro and everybody else, that they commit themselves to look for all the possibilities, explore all the means possible, but provided that all of them were peaceful and legal. And that's the position. And then later on, this diffused the situation with the United States that began to militarize. And the last stupidity that has taken place is that the UK sent a warship to the territory of Guyana, to the territorial waters that actually belong to Venezuela. And, you know, it was there, it was sort of threatening. The Venezuelans mobilized their defenses around it, waited for it to go. And when it got, Venezuela lifted the mobilization, the military mobilization. So that's what we are. And they agreed at this meeting in December in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they all agree, all the parties agree, that is to say Guyana and Venezuela, they agree they are going to meet now in March in Brazil to continue discussing this issue. And the agreement is that the 1966 Geneva Agreement is the framework to resolve this problem. So Venezuela again is showing that it's got tremendous capacity, and we must ensure that we have that information, you know, all the details. We did a huge amount of research to be listening. I'm going to send to Alison an article I wrote on this with all the details, so perhaps this can be circulated among the various people so that they have the background, the information. It's quite intricate, very legal, historical, and so on, but I think we've done a good job here. Hopefully it will be informative. So I'll leave it at that. So we need to ensure that we are clear that we want no military participation, no external forces. Venezuela and Guyana, only them with this framework of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is the only possible framework, and the Geneva 1966 agreement is the way forward. Nothing else will do, and it's got to be peaceful. The United States has got nothing to do with it, and if Venezuela demands that Exxon goes, Exxon should go. But we'll see how it happens, how it goes.
Yeah, thank you. No, very good. Thank you. Yes, we'll definitely circulate that article here. And again, encourage people that not only circulate today, but save that link and send it around and use it in our future work. So I want to address the final question to BANBOSE, and then I'll ask for any kind of closing comments from Laura and Francisco. But that is the question that says, now that Alex Saab is free, what is the next task of the Venezuelan Solidarity Movement? So that's, again, a pretty broad question, but any perspective you'd like to share about that. Again, we are celebrating and continue to celebrate the tremendous victory of the return of Venezuelan diplomat and political prisoner in the United States, Alex Saab, to Venezuela, where he is doing constant work along with the campaign that was mobilized for his freedom, continues to mobilize for other aspects of Venezuela's sovereignty and self-determination. So BANBOSE, what are the next tasks of the Venezuelan Solidarity Movement?
Well, I think that what our brothers and sisters in Angola says is applicable here. They would say the struggle continues, because obviously our solidarity cannot be just a piecemeal objective or a single victory objective. It must be a total objective. And as long as Venezuela exists on the sanctions, as long as Venezuela is facing blockades, as long as Venezuela is facing threats for regime change, there is a need for a worldwide solidarity. And so the struggle here continues, and we encourage everyone to find some solidarity group where they are, to work to ensure that Venezuela survives.
That's true. So thank you, BANBOSE. We do have our tasks and our perspectives moving forward. Francisco, would you like to share any closing comments?
Yeah, I mean, I already commented on the need for solidarity, more general things, but this year we face the elections. And Diosdado Cabello, in his program Con el Mazo Dando, which is quite good, he's made this very good point, which is we want free elections in Venezuela, free from sanctions. We want all the sanctions. You cannot run proper elections when you have sanctions. So that's the thing that we want to do. And what the United States are trying to do is they're trying to impose from Washington candidates in the Venezuelan elections, which is completely intolerable, unacceptable. And the weapon that they will, when it comes to these sort of things, is to say they will not recognize the results. And that obviously is a very serious problem. So the government is trying everything possible to ensure that, they haven't got any excuse. So therefore, our solidarity task between now and the election is to ensure that they are peaceful, to ensure that our governments, where we are, behave about it, and we campaign informing fully of the extraordinarily impeccable nature of the electoral system of Venezuela, which is the best in the world. And there is plenty of evidence of that, and there is no reason for that. And we should respect all the decisions taken by the legal and legitimate authorities of Venezuela regarding the whole business of the election. And that's as simple as that. And we have to be very strong on that and not be shy about it, and make statements, influence people of public influence, talk to the deputies, MPs, members of parliament, trade unionists, and everybody else that we can. We should talk to the devil and his grandmother to ensure that we have proper elections and without interference in Venezuela.
Thank you. And Laura?
Solamente agradecer.
I'd like to thank all the activism and the solidarity with Venezuela, and to tell you that from Venezuela, the people of Venezuela, it's corresponding all your solidarity actions with more work, with more organization, with to maintain, even in the hardest moments, this revolutionary process. As Francisco said, this is a year of a big challenge, but we are sure that it will be a year of victory for the Bolivarian revolution. And we hope we can share with you all the context that will go around this election process, and also some of the organizations that are activating always the solidarity. For example, the contact with the Institute Simón Bolívar. It would be very interesting that some comrades that are maintaining this solidarity politic can visit the country or be with us in certain way. Always President Maduro is inviting the speakers and the eyes of the world to see the extraordinary election system that we have in Venezuela, that it's so fair, that it's not only technical, but the information is confirmed, both handy and technical. And the revolution is always on the side of the deepening of the feminist socialism. We are still in the struggle. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Laura, Franco, for your time and energy for joining us here today, and to all other panelists, Francisco, Dominguez, BANBOSE, SHANGO. We are side by side, in our struggle, and we'll continue this fight. As BANBOSE said, La lucha sigue, the struggle continues. We are going to move to just a few short greetings from some folks that have joined us from across Canada and from supporting organizations, and then we'll chant together in our group photo. I first want to invite Mary Carmen Guevara, who is with Alba Movimientos in Ottawa, Canada, and many other important struggles as well. Mary Carmen, very good to see you today.
Good to see you too. Thank you, Alison. Gracias, Laura. Hola.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Francisco and BANBOSE. I'm sorry I cannot pronounce your name properly, but it was excellent presentation. I had this from the beginning when Alison started Free Alexan campaign. And tonight, because I forgot to make a new one, I decided to do this. But while I was doing this, I was thinking, one day we're going to do like this, and we're going to say, Viva Venezuela Libre. Greeting from Ottawa to everybody, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary Carmen. It's a very important point. We will win, and I heard that so clearly, especially from Laura today. It's really just an honor to be able to hear from someone fighting on the ground every day directly with U.S. imperialism. And very true, Mary Carmen. Very good to see you. And beautiful artwork.
Just to say that the invitation of Laura to go to Venezuela, you have to be very careful, because if you go to Venezuela, you will fall in love with the place. You will not come back.
It is a risk. It's true.
Yes, it's true.
Our next person is giving a greetings could tell us all about that for sure, who first went to Venezuela at the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2005, I think, Andrew. First person I knew probably that had ever traveled to Venezuela. Andrew Berry is here from Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO, an anti-war coalition here in Vancouver, to share greetings as well. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, thank you, Alison. It's Francisco just mentioned quite a bit in his talk about, I think there's an important aspect of the decline of the US empire that has been very obvious over the last few decades. And as an anti-war organizer, we look back 21 years ago when the US war on Iraq started. and at that time were the biggest anti-war demonstrations in the world. And the US went ahead anyway and proceeded with its criminal war against the people of Iraq. But it showed to the world that people around the world no longer bought the lies like they maybe once had. And not just in the United States, but this was throughout the world, not just in countries that participated in the war on Iraq, but around the world, from Latin America to Africa to Asia to Europe to North America. People said that they did not agree with this war. And it was a big defeat when the United States went ahead with that war. But I think it showed something that in the struggle of people around the world against the domination, against the lies of empire. And I think if we look a little bit further back to 1989, February 27th, the start of the Caracazo in Venezuela, it was a similar feeling that people no longer could continue this way of life, this way of domination under the rule of the United States. And it was, in my opinion, that was a very anti-war act that people in Venezuela did at the time. It was an anti-imperial, an anti-colonial act, and it planted a seed in people in Venezuela that, as we know, 3 years later, Hugo Chavez led an uprising against the US-backed regime at the time. And this led to, many years later, Hugo Chavez and people of Venezuela taking power of their country. And it's something that people in Venezuela have not given back to the United States since then. And we have seen countless campaigns of coups, threats of military intervention, and funding of different right-wing anti-Venezuelan groups within the country, attempts of war that we saw several years ago when the US tried to put Juan Guaido as president. And I think that what Venezuela has been able to do, not only in their own country, but around Latin America, is provide an opportunity for a better world. And we've seen that in Bolivia, we've seen in Nicaragua, and in different countries where people have joined an anti-imperial, an anti-war campaign against US domination. And Venezuela has been a very significant partner, a significant voice, I should say, for people in Palestine. Venezuela is one of 28 countries that has absolutely no recognition of the Zionist regime of Israel. Only 3 of those countries are not Muslim majority countries, and Venezuela is one of them. I think it's something that goes deeper than just religion. Venezuela knows the solidarity aspect of defending the rights of Palestinians. And as we see today, the genocidal campaign of the Zionist regime of Israel has killed over 30,000 people in just a few months in Palestine. Venezuela has been one of the biggest defenders of Palestine during this time. President Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, Celia Flores have been people who have been at the front of demonstrations, wearing their keffiyehs, wearing the clothes of Palestine in solidarity with Palestine against what's happening. And everyone around the world knows that this is not just an Israeli war on Palestinians. This is an American, a US-created war on the people of Palestine. And this directly connects to people in Venezuela who have been affected by the war, by the sanctions that Professor Francisco talked about just a few minutes ago, that the sanctions have killed hundreds of thousands of people in Venezuela. They know what the campaign of war of the United States is. And people in Palestine today are under that same direct attack of the United States bombs and guns and airplanes. And I think it's very, very, very important that as we have campaigned for years here in defense of Venezuela, is to make that connection, with Palestine, because it is the same struggle against imperialism, against war, and against the colonial domination the United States and their allies have done on the developing world. US hands off Venezuela. End the genocide in Gaza now.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, a very important also perspective when we're out marching for Palestine. We can bring Venezuela with us. And Babette has she also has a great sign. She's leaving for her radio show. But we will move quickly into our group photo. I really appreciate the greetings. I'm not able to get to everybody tonight, but and also the questions. I want to say sorry, of course, if there were other questions, we didn't get to them, but we really appreciate all of you today. We're going to go ahead and invite folks to join in the panelist space of the webinar, which means you'll be able to turn on your camera if you'd like. We'll briefly turn off translation and we will chant together. If you'd like to be invited into the panelist space, raise your hand or post in the chat if you haven't received the invitation yet. It always just takes us a minute to get everyone around. Also, wanted to give a really big thank you to Mercedes and Salome, who are translating simultaneously tonight. This is a hefty task. It is very important that we organize actions online that are bilingual, and really has enabled us to have such a variety of speakers that wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you so much to Salome and to Mercedes for today. We're still inviting people in, and as we do so, I will let folks know that there will be a picket marking the 3rd anniversary of these monthly online picket actions, and that will be taking place on March 26th, the last Tuesday of March, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. You can register today so as not to forget, but you'll also get an email with the information. I'll put the registration in the chat as everyone gets invited into the space. You should, as I said, be able to turn on your cameras and if you don't have a sign, don't worry. If you don't have a shirt, I mean, a Venezuela shirt, please wear a shirt. But if you don't have a Venezuela Solidarity shirt, turn on your cameras and we will take our picture today. I think some folks are still working on also getting invitations here. If you didn't get an invitation yet and you'd like to join the photo, then just post in the chat or raise your hand. But you should be getting one. Oh, here we go. There's a few more folks joining in. Everyone's figuring it out here. Thank you so much for your patience. Registration for the March 26th online picket action is going in the chat right now. Save the date. There we are. Okay. More people are coming. Our tech host here from Fire This Time Asda is saying more people are coming. So we'll give it a second. Folks, I think you should be able to unmute yourselves. Oh, and I need my sign. Fallen. Oh, 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okay. I think Asa, if you'd like to disable translation so we can all chat and hear one another. Let's say loud and clear. U.S. hands off Venezuela.
U.S. hands off Venezuela.
U.S. hands off Venezuela.
U.S. hands off Venezuela.
Lift the blockade on 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 Venezuela.
Viva, viva Venezuela.
Viva,
Viva
Venezuela.
It's kind of like singing all together. It's never quite coordinated, but it's really quite beautiful to hear all of your voices. And we're just taking a quick group photo. It looks like a few folks are still trying to join. It's not always easy. Again, thank you so much to Francisco Dominguez, Laura FRANCO, and BANBOSE SHANGO for joining today. To all of the new faces I see in front of me and all the folks that have probably made it to 36 out of 36 of the monthly pickets. This is an important recognition and achievement of the power of uniting our voices across borders around the world using this new online platform Zoom that was once forced upon us, but is now available for us to connect like we never could before. So good night all. March 26th will be the 37th monthly online picket action. We'll see you there, and we'll see you in Venezuela.
Yes.
Yes.
See you in
Venezuela, a la victoria.
Yes. Hasta la victoria siempre. We will win.
Adiós, Laura.